Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at another video by Eric Dubay called Flat Earth, Cause of the Tides. This should be very interesting.
Newton theorized, and it is now commonly taught, that the Earth's ocean tides are caused by gravitational lunar attraction. If the Moon is only 2,160 miles in diameter, and the Earth 8,000 miles, however, using their own math and law, it follows that the Earth is 87 times more massive, and therefore the larger object should attract the smaller to it, and not the other way around.
Ooh, sounds like we're trying to set up a false dichotomy there. Either the Earth attracts the oceans fully, or the Moon attracts the oceans fully. Well, let's see how this develops.
If the Earth's greater gravity is what keeps the Moon in orbit, it is impossible for the Moon's lesser gravity to supersede the Earth's gravity at Earth's sea level, where its gravitational attraction would even further out-trump the Moon's.
Supersedes? No one claims the Moon's gravity supersedes the Earth's gravity. The effect is cumulative. It may help to avoid thinking of the Earth and the Moon as two separate entities and think of it as the Earth-Moon system instead. This diagram clearly demonstrates the results of the math and laws that Eric referenced. Note that the center of mass in the Earth-Moon system is actually a point below the surface of the Earth. Since the strength of a gravitational field is a function of mass, we can see that at any point along the black line, an object or substance would be affected by both the gravitational fields of the Earth and of the Moon. It's this balancing act that gives us such interesting things as Lagrange points, where the cumulative effect of gravity results in neither body attracting an object. At each one of these points, L1 through L5, the net effect of the gravity of the Earth plus the gravity of the Moon on an object would be zero.
Not to mention, the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and should therefore exert a uniform influence on the Earth's tides, when in actuality, the Earth's tides vary greatly.
Not sure why this ridiculous meme is thrown in here in a discussion about tides, but as long as it's here. The bird is producing an upward force by flapping its wings. This is sufficient to counteract the effects of gravity. The water is producing no such upward force. Okay, let's see what he has to say about these varying tides.
Furthermore, if ocean tides are caused by the Moon's gravitation, how is it that lakes, ponds, and other smaller bodies of standing water remain outside the Moon's grasp, while the gigantic oceans are so affected?
Lakes and ponds are affected by the gravity of the Moon, just not in a way that produces tides, as they lack sufficient surface area. Tides are not produced by the Moon's gravity pulling water up into the air. Tides are produced by a differential in the gravitational effects on the water. To put it in the simplest terms, consider the mass of water that is not directly between the Earth and the Moon. This mass of water is affected more by the Earth's gravity than by the interaction between the Earth and the Moon. This is why most lakes are too small for this effect to be noticed. Please note that I said most lakes. The Great Lakes do cover enough of the Earth's surface to experience tides.
Thomas Winship wrote, "If the Moon lifted up the water, it is evident that near the land the water would be drawn away and low instead of high tide caused."
Already covered. The gravity from the Moon is not dragging the water up into the air.
Again, the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and it follows that if she exerted any influence on the Earth, that influence could only be a uniform influence. But the tides are not uniform. At Port Natal the rise and fall is about 6 feet, while at Beira, about 600 miles up the coast, the rise and fall is 26 feet. This effectually settles the matter that the Moon has no influence on the tides.
Well, that's a rather arrogant statement. Well, here's why it's utterly untrue. Although the energy driving the rise and fall of the tides does come from the interaction between the moon's gravity and the Earth's gravity, the results we witness at the various shorelines are also affected by the interaction between a moving mass of water and the shape and depth of the seabed.
Tides are caused by the gentle and gradual rise and fall of the earth on the bosom of the mighty deep.
Bosom of the mighty deep? Please provide evidence, any evidence, that this mighty deep exists, and maybe some of its features. And then explain what would cause the Earth's rise and fall on this mighty deep.
In inland lakes, there are no tides, which also proves that the moon cannot attract either the earth or water to cause tides.
Already covered, you need a sufficient area to allow for a differential between gravitational effects in order to observe tides.
But the fact that the basin of the lake is on the earth which rests on the waters of the deep shows that no tides are possible, as the waters of the lakes together with the earth rise and fall, and thus the tides at the coast are caused, while there are no tides on waters unconnected with the sea.
No, it's for the reasons I just gave. Repeatedly.
David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "Even Sir Isaac Newton himself confessed that the explanation of the moon's action on the tides was the least satisfactory part of his theory of gravitation. This theory asserts that the larger object attracts the smaller, and the mass of the moon being reckoned as only 1/8 of that of the earth, it follows that, if by the presumed force of gravitation the earth revolves round the sun, much more for the same reason should the moon do so likewise, instead of which that wilful orb still continues to go round our world."
Well, fortunately for us, we've gained greater understanding of things like gravity and orbits and such. And we now know that, in fact, the moon and the earth orbit each other.
Tides vary greatly in height, owing chiefly to the different configurations of the adjoining lands. At Chepstow it rises to 60 feet, at Portishead to 50, while at Dublin Bay it is but 12, and at Wexford only 5 feet.
Yeah, kind of like I said before.
That the earth itself has a slight tremulous motion may be seen in the movement of the spirit level, even when fixed as steadily as possible.
And that helps your case how? Geologic events occur all the time. Earthquakes and other events cause vibrations in the Earth's crust, which is floating on the Earth's magma, which is a liquid. Oh, there's your great deep. But somehow I don't think that's what you meant.
And that the sea has a fluctuation may be witnessed by the oscillation of an anchored ship in the calmest day of summer. By what means the tides are so regularly affected is at present only conjectured.
Again, lucky us, it's not only conjectured anymore.
Possibly it may be by atmospheric pressure on the waters of the great deep, and perhaps even the moon itself, as suggested by the late Dr. Robotham, may influence the atmosphere, increasing or diminishing its barometric pressure, and indirectly the rise and fall of earth in the waters.
Well, there's some interesting statements. They were uttered in a time when we did not have the understanding we have today. The causes of the tides are clearly understood.
Dr. Samuel Robotham wrote, "It is affirmed that the intensity of attraction increases with proximity and vice versa. How, then, when the waters are drawn up by the moon from their bed and away from the earth's attraction, which at that greater distance from the center is considerably diminished, while that of the moon is proportionally increased, is it possible that all the waters acted on should be prevented leaving the earth and flying away to the moon? If the moon has power of attraction sufficient to lift the waters of the earth at all, even a single inch from their deepest receptacles, where the earth's attraction is much the greater, there is nothing in the theory of attraction of gravitation to prevent her taking to herself all the waters which come within her influence."
All right, that's just silly. Let me try and explain it another way. The moon's gravity is not pulling the water up. It is reducing the effect of the Earth's gravity on the water. There. Maybe that clears it up a little.
Let the smaller body once overcome the power of the larger, and the power of the smaller becomes greater than when it first operated, because the matter acted on is now nearer to it. Proximity is greater, and therefore power is greater.
Okay, let's think about this last statement. Proximity is greater, therefore power is greater. Alright, first let's work out the proximities involved. We're going to be as generous as possible here. And instead of using the smallest change in tide height in the world, we'll use the largest. And the highest tides in the world are in Canada's Bay of Fundy. The difference between low and high tide there has been measured at 16.3 meters. Now, of course, only half of that can be attributed to being lifted above mean sea level. But since we don't want to confuse Eric any more than necessary, we'll just give him the whole 16.3 meters and say that's how much the sea level rises in the high tide in the Bay of Fundy. Now, the moon is an average of 384,400 kilometers away from the Earth. Now, that's 384,400,000 meters. Dividing these two, we get the number at the bottom, which represents the increase in proximity and hence the increase in power. So you can see it is not what we would call a very significant increase.
How then can the waters of the ocean immediately underneath the moon flow towards the shores and so cause a flood tide? Water flows, it is said, through the law of gravity or attraction of the earth's center. It is possible, then, for the moon, having once overcome the power of the earth, to let go her hold upon the waters, through the influence of a power which she has conquered, and which therefore is less than her own?
Well, quite a few misconceptions expressed in that section. These words once again assume that the moon is pulling water up into the air, which we now understand it is not.
The above and other difficulties which exist in connection with the explanation of the tides afforded by the Newtonian system have led many, including Sir Isaac Newton himself, to admit that such explanation is the least satisfactory portion of the theory of gravitation.
You said that before. And the only thing that made it least satisfactory was that, at the time, all of the mechanics behind tidal motion were not yet understood. They are now well understood.
Thus we have been carried forward by the sheer force of evidence to the conclusion that the tides of the sea do not arise from the attraction of the moon, but simply from the rising and falling of the floating earth in the waters of the great deep.
There is no evidence of anything of the sort.
That calmness which is found to exist at the bottom of the great seas could not be possible if the waters were alternately raised by the moon and pulled down by the earth.
Again, the water is not pulled up by the moon.
Bearing this fact in mind, that there exists a continual pressure of the atmosphere upon the earth, and associating it with the fact that the earth is a vast plain stretched out upon the waters.
Sorry, unfounded assertion. There's no evidence to demonstrate any of that.
And it will be seen that it must of necessity slightly fluctuate or slowly rise and fall in the water. As by the action of the atmosphere the earth is slowly depressed, the water moves towards the receding shore and produces the flood tide, and when by the reaction of the resisting oceanic medium the earth gradually ascends and the waters recede, and the ebb tide is produced.
Okay, and there's a conclusion based on a bunch of assertions that were not evidently true.
This is the general cause of tides. Whatever peculiarities are observable, they may be traced to the reaction of channels, bays, headlands, and other local causes. That the earth has a vibratory or tremulous motion, such as must necessarily belong to a floating and fluctuating structure, is abundantly proved by the experience of astronomers and surveyors.
Not any modern astronomers and surveyors.
If a delicate spirit level be firmly placed upon a rock or upon the most solid foundation which it is possible to construct, the very curious phenomenon will be observed of constant change in the position of the air bubble. However carefully the level may be adjusted, and the instrument protected from the atmosphere, the bubble will maintain its position many seconds together. A somewhat similar influence has been noticed in astronomical observatories, where instruments of the best construction are placed in the most approved positions, and cannot always be relied upon without occasional readjustment.
Okay, sensitive measuring equipment has to be recalibrated periodically. Okay, I'm with you. What's your point? Does anyone else notice this guy tends to repeat himself? Like in those 200 proofs, which first off aren't really proofs, but they're also not 200. If you remove all the repetitive mentioning of the same alleged proof, it actually works out to be around 130. Anyway, vibrations detected in sensitive instruments are no indication that we're bobbing along on some great deep.
If the moon pulled the tides due to its alleged gravity, then why does it only pull the ocean's water and not all the world's lakes, marshes, ponds, and other inland waters?
Already explained, it does, just not in a way that produces tides, except in the Great Lakes.
The tides are clearly a product of the interconnected ocean waters, and not the other waters of Earth, and therefore caused either by the gentle rocking of the Earth on the great deep, as stated by the above 19th century authors, or, if more ancient explorers can be trusted, the ocean tides very well may be caused by a huge whirlpool vortex surrounding Mount Meru at the North Pole, which reverses direction every 6 hours, alternately sucking in and pushing out the great seas of the earth, like the breath of Gaia at the naval center point of Earth, breathing in and out twice per day.
Okay, now you're starting to make me question your sanity. This is somewhat disconcerting. If ancient mariners can be trusted, is not a line you should find in any scientific proof of anything.
The 14th century writings Inventio Fortunata by Nicholas Stalin and the Itinerarium of Jacobus Snoyen mention the magnetic mountain being so powerful that it pulled the nails right out of explorers' boats. The encircling whirlpool and four directional rivers surrounding the mountain were said to change every 6 hours, causing the tides, comparing them to the breath of God at the navel of the earth, inhaling and exhaling the great seas. The cartographer Gerardus Mercator's 16th century map informs us that the waters of the oceans are carried northward to the pole through these rivers with great force, such that no wind could make a ship sail against the current. The waters then disappear into an enormous whirlpool beneath the mountain at the pole, and are absorbed into the bowels of the earth.
14th century, huh? You don't think we've learned anything since then?
On Gerardus Mercator's map he wrote, "A monstrous gulf in the sea towards which from all sides the billows of the sea coming from remote parts converge and run together as though brought there by a conduit, pouring into these mysterious abysses of nature, they are as though devoured thereby, and should it happen that a vessel pass there, it is seized and drawn away with such powerful violence of the waves, that this hungry force immediately swallows it up, never to appear again."
You're doing this intentionally, aren't you? You're intentionally repeating old stories so that the people who were kind enough to come and watch my video leave in frustration. That's what you're doing, isn't it?
Fridtjof Nansen has found mentions of a great northern whirlpool in Norse legends of the world's well, Velgamur, which causes the tides by pushing and pulling waters through its subterranean channels. Isidore of Seville, the Gesta Hemaburgenesis Ecclesiae Pontificum, the Topographia Hibernica of Giraldus Cambrensis. His description of the northern whirlpool is cited by Mercator, the Historia Norvegae, the Speculum Regale of Einar Gunnarsson, and a particularly interesting quote from the Langobard author Paulus Warnefridi, also called Diaconus, states, "And not far from the shore which we before spoke of on the west, where the ocean extends without bounds, is that very deep abyss of waters which we commonly call the ocean's navel. It is said twice a day to suck the waves into itself, and to spew them out again, as is proved to happen along all these coasts, where the waves rush in and go back again with fearful rapidity. By the whirlpool of which we have spoken, it is asserted that ships are often drawn in with such rapidity that they seem to resemble the flight of arrows through the air, and sometimes they are lost in the gulf, with a very frightful destruction. Often just as they are about to go under, they are brought back again by a sudden shock of the waves, and they are sent out again thence with the same rapidity with which they were drawn in." The Gesta Hammaburgenesis Ecclesiae Pontificum states that Archbishop Adalbert told a team of noblemen of Phrygia around 1035 to 1043 to set sail to explore the North Polar region. As they headed north beyond Greenland, quote, "Of a sudden they fell into that numbing ocean's dark mist which could hardly be penetrated with the eyes, and behold, the current of the fluctuating ocean whirled back to its mysterious fountainhead, and with most furious impetuosity drew the unhappy sailors, who in their despair now thought only of death, on to chaos. This, they say, is the abysmal chasm."
All right. This storytelling, I'm calling it here. We're going to zip ahead.
So in short, what is the cause of the tides? Well, it is clearly not the supposed gravity of the moon, a smaller object than the earth, far away from the earth, somehow pulling the tides up in a uniform way, as this doesn't happen.
Agreed. The moon is not pulling the tides up. And by the way, that's what we call a straw man argument.
Alternately, it could be, as Samuel Rowbotham proposed, that it is simply the gentle fluctuation of the earth on the waters of the great deep causing the tides.
Nope, it's not that. We know it's not that because there's no evidence for that.
However, this explanation alone fails to provide an answer for the regularity of tides coming in every 6 hours and going out alternately every 6 hours, to which these ancient explorers offer a possible explanation, and this also, curiously, could be why the flight and sailing restrictions at the North Pole, why people like Rodney Clough were turned away when their vessel tried to explore the North Pole. Russian military vessels and other ships explore the area, making sure that we don't take our own independent explorations to the North Polar region.
Ah, there it is. I knew there'd be some conspiracy crap thrown in here somewhere.
So what are they hiding there? Does this magnetic Mount Meru actually exist? Is there actually a whirlpool spinning around it with 4 directional rivers constantly sucking in and pushing out the waters of the earth in 6-hour intervals? It sure would be nice if the UN and world governments would allow us to independently explore the Arctic and Antarctic so we could find answers to questions like these.
But would you? Would you go and explore and find answers? Or would you stay in your parents' basement digging through YouTube for more fictional proofs of your wild ideas? Well, there we have it. In my last video, I asked you all if you thought Eric Dubay was either a liar or an idiot. I'm going to have to amend that. This time, I'm asking if you think Eric Dubay is a liar or insane. Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.